Ed's firm runs how many now, Ed? 9, is it? Or 9 different short line railroads, very successfully around the nation. As all of you know, Ed's Iowa Pacific Holdings owns and operates the San Luis Rio Grande Valley line, the Rio Grande Scenic line. It's a tremendous asset for the state of Colorado, and also runs freight traffic over that line. I think is Matt still GM down there? Matt's been a strong supporter of ColoRail over the years as well. So we are really delighted to have Ed here. I'm going to ask my son to set up his presentation. Ed, welcome.
This is actually, I'm really glad to be here today because I got to come in on the A line yesterday. What a fantastic train. It really does the job. Fast, frequent service between the airport and downtown, electrified. It's really a showpiece for the nation, and I appreciate being here today because I got to see that last night as an actual passenger, and I think there were probably more trains that arrived and left Union Station yesterday than in the last 2 months. So that's a great accomplishment for Denver and Colorado. And this is the first time I have spoken to you since 1997. John invited me out when I was Vice President of Mail Express at Amtrak. And I think you all know that I really believe strongly in passenger service. When I went to Amtrak in 1996, there was exactly one train from Chicago to the East Coast, Chicago, New York, Lakeshore Limited. Because of Mail Express, we were able to run the Three Rivers from Chicago to New York, extend to Pennsylvania to Chicago, and we had plans on the drawing board for more. But it was something, the idea was, in my mind, that Mail and Express was something that could support passenger trains. And certainly during the Mail and Express era, Southwest Chief in 2001 grossed $70 million. 16 years later, and 15 years later in fiscal 2016, $50 million. So it's $20 million less now than it was then. I know that there was a lot of controversy about how much money was made on Mail and Express. One of the most interesting things I ever did in my life was to dive in from the back end, dive into the Amtrak accounting system and see how the books are cooked. So it's something that was a challenge then, and I think it's still a challenge today. I want to mention that Steve Gregory, who is Executive Vice President of Marketing for Iowa Pacific, is here. Steve, just raise your hands. Steve actually lives in Denver and is also, he's probably ridden more passenger trains than I have, which would mean he's ridden a lot. He did not write this speech. A little story that Graham Claytor told me a number, probably 1994, about D.W. Brosnan. Bill Brosnan was the president of Southern Railway before Claytor, and he had a reputation of being a fairly nasty guy. And of course, railroads back in the 40s and 50s were really run from the top down. It was a very militaristic kind of thing, and Brosnan had a speechwriter that, in his mind, could just never get it right. No matter what, Brosnan took the red pencil to every speech and corrected and corrected and corrected. So called the guy in one day and he says, now look, I'm going off on the fall inspection. I'm going to be on the business car for the next 10 days riding around the Southern Railway. And when I get off, I have to go to the Greenbrier and make a speech to the National Industrial Transportation League. So I'm not going to have time to correct your shoddy work. You're going to have to do it right. The guy says, yes, sir, Mr. Brosnan, I will get it right. So sure enough, Mr. Brosnan walks into the room, walks up to the podium, the speechwriter hands him the speech, he puts it down, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to talk to you about the 3 biggest problems facing the Southern Railway. They are excessive government regulation, sound familiar? Feather bedding, and the inability of railroads to compete with trucks. And I'm here to tell you what the Southern Railway is going to do about that. He turns the page and it says, you figure it out, I quit. said, Iowa Pacific has 9 railroads in the U.S., 3 in England. We run, we're really the only short line railroad group that runs both freight and passenger trains, and that's purely intentional. With my experience at Amtrak, other people in the group having an interest in passenger trains, we set out in 2006 to develop confidence around running passenger trains. And so we began with tourist railroads because those are relatively more simple. I'm sure that anybody involved in the tourist railroad industry might disagree with that, but the thing about it is you have a lot of ability to control things. And we wanted to learn how to provide onboard service and maintain cars and sell tickets and basically learn how to do all the things that make people who ride the train feel good about the experience. So we have railroads from coast to coast. We bought and sold a few, but we last year were the largest carrier of passengers for Warner Brothers, Polar Express. They franchise out Polar Express to 65 different people, and they did 900,000 passengers last year. We did 300,000 of that. And so it really has taught me a lot about what makes people happy, why somebody will buy a $99 dome ticket to ride in the dark in Lubbock, Texas with a bunch of screaming 6-year-olds. It solved a lot of problems. So we have a phenomenal fleet of almost 200 cars, and including 9 full-length dome cars. So we have a lot of cars that will manage. So let's talk about the state of play for private rail passenger operators. This is really simple. It's not complicated at all. How many private intercity passenger rail operators are there in the U.S.? What's the total number of trains per week? 8. And what's the total number of rail cars in service? 4. Did anybody get a Lionel train set under the Christmas tree when you were a kid? And the first thing you said was, man, I need more track. I need more trains. That's what, we really have the starter set of intercity passenger. The Hoosier State is the starter set. So it's hard though, because running a private passenger train in today's world means that you have to meet a whole lot of regulations. And you have to get access to a lot of things that you don't own in order to make it work. So you have to have rolling stock. Believe me, Amtrak is not going to lend you an old broken down caboose to help you do what they look at as competing with them. And you have to be compliant not just with the kinds of regulations that you might imagine FRA would throw out, but a lot of others as well. So we're going to talk about each of these. First, let's talk about access to infrastructure and facilities. So Amtrak, in the 1970 law, the Rail Passenger Service Act of 1970, got compelled access to all the track in this country. So the railroads can't say no. I mean, you hear the railroads say no a lot, but they've developed ways to say no. We don't have capacity, the tracks are too congested, you have to make a contribution to capital. They've got ways to say no, but at the end of the day, if somebody's willing to come up with the capital, they can't say no. But Amtrak is the only entity in the United States that has compelled access. RTD doesn't have compelled access. Chicago Metro doesn't have compelled access. They have to negotiate with the freight railroad, negotiate with the owner of the infrastructure, or buy their own right-of-way and build their own track in order to run a train. So that's a hurdle for any private operator. So private operator has to negotiate access. Then if you look at the routes that are running today, Amtrak either owns, leases, or otherwise controls most of the stations. So you want to leave from Chicago Union Station, Amtrak owns the Chicago Union Station Company. So you either have to have a deal with Amtrak or you can't get into Chicago Union Station Company. I even made a deal with Metra to run trains to Madison, Wisconsin, because Metra has access to Union Station. Amtrak was able to legally block that. So access to stations is a challenge. But one of the interesting things that happened in the Passenger Rail Investment Act of 2008 was Congress gave the states access to anything Amtrak owns. So if the state wants to contract with somebody else to do something, And Amtrak says, no, you can't use the station. The state has a way under Section 217 of PREA to say, no, wait a minute, I do get access to that. So, rolling stock. Well, Amtrak does have a lot of rolling stock. And the interesting thing is, the superliners, a lot of the superliners that are running on the California Zephyr through Denver every day were built in 1980. They're 36 years old. Most of the cars that were running on the San Francisco Zephyr in 1971, when Amtrak took over, were less than 20 years old. Remember, those of you older ones in the group, how Amtrak came in and said, we're going to get rid of all that old junk rolling stock? The old junk rolling stock was actually a lot younger than the old junk rolling stock that they're running today, and there is no replacement in sight for the superliners. They're struggling to get some additional viewliners out of the shop. Nippon Sharyo completely blew it in building a next generation car for Illinois and California. They're back to the drawing board. So new rolling stock for long distance trains is really probably only a dream. So the rolling stock they have is tired. They've run the wheels off of it, and they haven't had the money to maintain it. Now, Steve and I every year go to Canada with a group of railroaders in February to ride the Via Rail Canadian from Vancouver to Toronto. And every year I am struck by how much reinvestment has been made in that equipment and what good shape it's in. And those cars were built in the 1950s. We're talking cars that are double the age of the superliners and yet are in better condition. And I say they're in better condition because I also ride Amtrak frequently. In the last year, I've been on the Coast Starlight, I've been on the Zephyr, the Chief, the Auto Train, the Capital, and I've been on the City of New Orleans 27 times. So I have seen superliners, of all sorts, and the difference between the average superliner in service on Amtrak and the average Bud Heritage car in service on Via is pretty striking. So in our world, we have tried to come up with historic pieces of rolling stock, I'll grant you that, but heritage cars that we can return to zero age, following more of the Via Rail model than the Amtrak model. And we have acquired dome cars, coaches, sleepers, but there's a limited number of those. And so what happens when you want to run a state train? Well, other than our heritage rolling stock, there's really only two options. The state can provide rolling stock, and I'll tell you, North Carolina has a great set of cars for the Piedmont. Steve and I were just on the Piedmont a couple of weeks ago. Those cars are in excellent condition. The only other option is to buy new rolling stock. So we went out to California and saw the cars that are under construction for All Aboard Florida by Siemens. Beautiful cars. Extremely nice cars, and I think they'll be great in service, they'll be comfortable, they'll be quiet. And one of those cars costs more than our entire Hoosier State train set. So you have a cost trade-off, and you also have a time trade-off. If you go now to order a new car from anybody, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, where we can take our heritage rolling stock and put a car in service that does exactly the same thing in 3 to 6 months. So I'm pointed toward heritage rolling stock as long as we can make it safe and reliable, and they are safe and reliable at 110 miles an hour, not that the Hoosier State gets much over 60, but they are safe and reliable, and they meet all of the regulations. So compliance with regulations is kind of interesting. Just going to tell you how this all works. This is a picture of an inspection pit. So when we were selected to run the Hoosier State, one of the first things that happened was Amtrak said, well, we're going to have to inspect all your cars to see if they comply with all the regulations. And we said, great. And so we said to the FRA, Amtrak wants to inspect the cars, you come inspect the cars too. So we said, so the state of Indiana said to Amtrak, what day do you want Iowa Pacific to have the cars down at 14th Street to be inspected? And Amtrak said, well, in Indiana, you can't come to our facility because you don't have insurance. So we can inspect them, but we can't let you observe our inspection. And Indiana said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, hey, that's okay because we have the insurance and Indiana can be there as our agents. And the guys at Amtrak said, nice try, Ed, we're not going to do that. So at that point, we said, okay, well, we'll do our own inspection. We have a railroad in Chicago and Bentonville. And so we invited the FRA and Amtrak out in January to look at the cars. And when it was all over with, Amtrak said, well, it's all well and good, but we didn't have a pit, so we can't okay anything because we didn't look at them underneath. So Indiana went back to Amtrak and said, well, why don't you let Iowa Pacific, we won't even come a second time, just let them bring the cars down and you can do your inspection. And at that point they said, you know what, we're really busy down here at 14th Street, we don't think we can do that either. So we built a pit. We went out and in a week and a half, we dug a pit. We had the FRA track and bridge guys come out and bless it. And then everybody came back and looked at the cars. And they found some things that they wanted us to change. They gave us a list, we changed them. And you know what? August 1st, we started running the train. But it was everything to do with 238, which is the way passenger rolling stock is constructed and maintained, including 223 windows. But the thing that really got us was ADA. We had a car that had an ADA accessible bathroom out of at that time, the 3 cars that we were planning to run. And the FRA is responsible for enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act. And they said, well, that's not satisfactory because every car has to have a handicapped accessible facility. We said, well, okay, so if we just run 2 cars and we have 2 wheelchair positions in the 2 cars, then we're okay, right? Well, no, because one of the cars is a business class car, and you have to have a handicap facility that applies to business class. Oh, and by the way, the handicap bathroom is 4 inches too narrow. And we said, well, wait a minute, Amtrak built this handicap. Oh, well, yeah, but the regulations have changed. So it'll rip the entire bathroom out and start over and put in a new handicap bathroom. We went through all of that, and then I went down to Fort Worth and I looked at the Heartland Flyer, and they had 3 cars there. They only had 1 that had handicapped accessibility, and I said to the guy at the FRA, is there a different set of standards here? And he said, don't ask. So then the Food and Drug Administration was involved because if there's even if there's no food service in the car, if there's just water, you have to have a certificate of sanitary construction. Well, some of these cars were built in 1955, 56, 57. No, that's not good enough because there's been so much that's happened since then. You have to go through an engineering and you have to provide a new certificate of sanitary construction. So we jumped through that hoop as well. Then they came out to inspect the commissary where we actually bring the food in that goes onto the train, and they had a list of things that we had to fix there. The overhead door that comes down where the truck comes in, there was a 1/4 inch gap between the rubber strip and the concrete, and we couldn't have a 1/4 inch gap between the rubber strip and the concrete because an Amtrak inspector could get through that. So we had to fix that. And then OSHA, worker safety, and then the states get involved. We had to get liquor licenses for both Illinois and Indiana, and we had to deal with public health inspecting the cars as well as FDA. So then the next thing you need is a business plan. All the passenger train advocates that I talk to come up and say, there's one question. You guys probably have heard this question, you probably asked this question, you probably have an answer to the question, can you make money running a passenger train? Right? Everybody wants to know the answer to that. What we know about passenger trains right now is that the answer is no. Iowa Pacific actually made a $6 million profit on $22 million in revenue on passenger trains last year. And we did that. We went after a very specific marketplace in a number of different places. We knew what the market was that we were after. We knew how to price to that marketplace so that the margin of revenue over expenses made some sense. You can't do that everywhere. You can't do that specifically. You can't do that with 8 trains a week between Chicago and Indianapolis. It doesn't make any sense at all. And why do we have 8 trains a week between Chicago and Indianapolis? Well, the Cardinal runs 3 days a week out of Chicago, and the Hoosier State, the train that we operate in conjunction with Amtrak in Indiana, covers the other 4 days. So the reality is that what you have to have in order for passenger trains to do well is the service that people actually want. And my experience on this is that what you're doing in Denver with the airport train is the service people want. Train leaves every 15 minutes or every half hour. And in England, where we also have a couple of railroads, there's so many trains that really, if you know which station to go to in London, you can get to pretty much wherever you want to go without a schedule because the trains are that frequent. I was on a train from London to Exeter and was talking on my cell phone, and when I got off, the Brit sitting across the aisle from me said, "Hey, you're from America." And so we started talking, and he said, "You must hate our trains." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they're so slow and there's not very many of them." And I said, "Okay, so let's just do a little sanity check here. How many trains a day between London and Exeter?" He said, "Well, on the Great Western, there's maybe 20 trains each way, and out of Waterloo, there's another 16 trains a day, so I guess 36 trains a day." I said, "Okay, so London, capital, Exeter, kind of regional capital, 200 miles apart, almost exactly the same as Chicago, big city, and Indianapolis, regional capital, over 1 million people. How many trains a day do you think between Chicago and Indianapolis?" And he said, 60. I said, 1. He said, "That's daft." Couldn't argue with that. It is, but that's what you have to do to make money is, you have to, the guy who wants to go needs to be able to say to himself, "I can get there quicker by train than in the car." Well, there's 2 components to that. One is that the train has to go at least as fast as the car. But the other is it has to leave frequently, because if I'm going to St. Louis, which I do, and the next train isn't leaving for 4 hours, I got news for you. I can be in St. Louis by the time the next train leaves if I just get in the car. So it's not so much about going 200 miles an hour. It's about going 200 times a day. And in England, they call it clock service. And the minimum standard for clock service is an hourly train. But anybody who only has an hourly train is looked down on as having poor service. In a lot of cases, half hour, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And certainly the Heathrow Express, which is comparable to the Denver Airport train, leaves every 15 minutes. So they do understand in the United Kingdom that it's really about frequency. Most of the trains that I ride in England don't go any faster than trains in this country. They go 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. There are some that go 90 or 100 or even 125 for short stretches. But the guy that rode with me on the Great Western was unhappy because he could look across the pond to France and see trains were going 250 miles an hour, and he wanted to go faster. But he wanted to go faster on trains where he can already go down to the station, get on a train every 30 minutes to go to Exeter. So the bottom line on a business plan in my book is frequency. That's the number one thing. Next. So then, where do you get the money? You got to get from 8 trains a week to 36 trains a day. I think that would be a good number for Chicago and other quarters. So there are 19 states today that pay something to Amtrak for an intercity train. Colorado is not one of those. But the states that do are looking for improvements versus what they have now. And I want you to know that I think the Amtrak people who work these trains are doing a phenomenal job. The engineers and conductors that work on the Hoosier State are just the most enthusiastic, warm, passenger-friendly. You know, you hear a lot of things about Amtrak employees being snarly or surly. I do not experience that in any way whatsoever on the Hoosier State. Everybody that's on there is doing everything they can to encourage ridership. But Amtrak has a lot of challenges. They have never had a long-term budget. They've never had a consistent supply of money. And you know what? That was true in England for British Rail. British Rail, over the years, was constantly under attack on its budget. And when they privatized the railroads, what they did was as much political as it was service-oriented. Because they were able to take away from the political spectrum the idea that everybody in the parliament could focus on one guy, the guy who ran British Rail, and make him the target of all their anger. We have that problem here in the U.S. Joe Boardman is doing his best, and we have the same number of long-distance trains now that we had when he started. We haven't lost anything. He's done a good job of preserving the long-distance network in the face of a lot of people who wanted to see major chunks of it go away. But every congressman, we have a 535-member board of directors for Amtrak. So now, what's changed in England is there isn't one guy who runs the trains. There's a bunch of guys. Tim O'Toole, former ColoRail executive, is the head of First Group, which runs Great Western and other trains. Richard Branson has his name attached to two major long-distance routes. So when somebody in Parliament gets mad about a train, they don't have a single target. They have to find the right guy first. There's like 30 different franchisees or different routes in England, and that not only gives everybody an opportunity to innovate and make service better, but it reduces the idea that they can be a target. So I think that one of the FAST Act provisions is private operation of long-distance routes. And this is a hot button. This is a third rail for a lot of people. But up to 3 routes can be privatized. The private operator has to make their own agreement with the track owner. And DOT will provide up to 90% of the subsidy Amtrak receives. We're happy with having Amtrak crews run the Hoosier State and having a partnership with Amtrak. I know that Amtrak would not say that they're happy, nor would they describe it as a partnership. But the reality is, Indiana DOT, Amtrak, and Iowa Pacific are joined at the hip. What's going to happen with these long-distance routes? Is Richard Branson going to come in? He obviously has a lot more money than I do. If he has $2, he has more money than I do. But is Tim O'Toole going to come in? Well, I can tell you in the conversations that I have had with Class 1 railroads, they are very interested in having somebody other than Amtrak operate long-distance routes. Why? It is really very simple. Amtrak is pursuing extreme litigation on-time performance. Amtrak has basically said that every freight train in the United States has to be put in a siding for any Amtrak train that approaches. CSX recently did a study that they filed with the STB on just one division between Washington and Richmond, the former Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac. And in that study, they showed that if they followed what Amtrak is asking for, it would not only affect CSX freight trains, which would basically have to run at night. They'd have to be limited in the number of hours they can run. But it would also crater Virginia Railroad Express's schedule because they run on the same tracks and they use some of the same capacity if you followed the rules that Amtrak has set forth. So I've had 2 Class 1 executives say to me, we're very interested in working with somebody other than Amtrak so that we don't have to be subjected to untenable rules that will crater freight traffic. So what are some of the possible outcomes here? Well, one is that Amtrak wakes up and says, wow, you know, private investment is really a bolt-on to what we're doing, and we can use that to run more trains, and we can use that to run more routes, and we can do all that quicker if we partner with private areas and continue to look for alternatives that provide better service. Of the 19 states, Iowa Pacific has been in contact with 11 of them. There are at least 2 other states that are close to putting out an RFP for something like what Indiana has. And I can tell you that in Indiana, we've been running since August. Our on-time performance on that line went from 47% to over 90%. Customer satisfaction is over 90%. We went from worst to first in the Amtrak customer satisfaction performance. And revenue is running ahead of budget because both combination of yield management and the introduction of business class made it possible for us to raise revenue. Business class did not exist on the Hoosier State, and our form of business class does not exist in most other places of the Amtrak system. Our business class is really like airline business class. If you were on United from New York to Los Angeles, 5 hours, about the same as Hoosier State, and you couldn't even get a cup of coffee, you'd go nuts. I mean, there'd be a riot. That's what the Hoosier State was before we came along. You couldn't even get a cup of coffee. So now in Coach, you can buy a regular meal just like you can on United. You get a hot meal on United now, New York to LA in Coach. But in first class, we can't call it first class, only Acela has first class. In business class, you get a full hot meal and adult beverages. And one of the things that gets people out of cars is adult beverages. People know that they're not supposed to drink. And so if you want to have breakfast and Bloody Mary, you're better off doing that on the train than you are getting it at the drive-thru at McDonald's. So the other thing is Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi, had a guy with an airline tell me that they started out, they weren't going to equip airliners with Wi-Fi. And they did a study and they figured out that anybody who is somewhere for more than 30 minutes in today's world feels like they have to have Wi-Fi. Metro is equipping some cars with Wi-Fi. I mean, my commute's only 20 minutes, but I know a lot of people that in 15 are starting to get the shakes if they have Wi-Fi. And the average American looks at his phone 175 times a day. So in a 5-hour driving trip, if you know, what are you going to do? Throw it in the back seat and never look at it? I don't know anybody who does that. So it's safer for the people, not just the people who are driving, but the people who have to encounter the guy who's driving like this. And it's safer if you're going to have a drink. And you can be more productive because you can use your computer, you can get on the internet. So those are things that make the trip more enjoyable. We have all of those. And particularly in business class, it's included in the ticket. So that's one of the reasons the revenue is up from where it was. So there are some problems, though, that I just want to talk about this briefly. The railroad network in the United States is in deep, deep trouble. We all have been listening year after year to the railroad renaissance. And there was a railroad renaissance. And a lot of people think it's over. It's over because the National Rail Network is in serious danger, particularly because of coal and oil, we've been lulled to sleep. The government has not been helpful with things like positive train control, and something really has to change. So if you think about the national network, last year, $25 billion, actually it's more like $30 billion in capital, and only grossed $65 billion in revenue. So another way of looking at that is that 50 cents out of every dollar went back into the national network. No other industry in the world spends as much of its revenue dollar on capital as railroads. And a lot of that is because of regulation. Tier 4 locomotives, extremely expensive to maintain and operate and buy. Cost overruns on positive train control. And customers are out completely buying new tank cars to replace crude oil tank cars that were outlawed last year in regulations. But the fundamental traffic base has got a problem. We'll talk about coal on the next slide, but intermodal has got a problem too. And what we're doing, instead of trying to figure that out, is we're buying back shares. Every Class 1 railroad is buying back shares. And they're using the money, instead of putting it into the network, They're using it to buy back shares. UP last year borrowed $2 billion to buy back shares. That raises your earnings per share because there are fewer shares outstanding. That's why they do that. But it doesn't do anything for promotion of public policy and getting trucks off the road. Next. So coal, this is not a great map, but if you look at it, this is where coal moves or did move in the United States. And a lot of the network is really paid for by coal trains. So coal, 1 out of every 5 coal-fired power plants in the United States is closing this year, 2016. There's a good chance that by the end of the decade, coal will be down to about 300 to 350 million tons a year, half of where it was only 5 years ago. And when coal is cut in half, the revenue that is used to support the capital investment, the red lines, goes down. It may go away. So you're seeing some of that here in Colorado. Fewer trains on the Moffett, fewer trains on the Joint Line. That could be a plus if you're trying to run a passenger train, maybe there is some capacity going forward, but you're still going to have to pay for it because the railroads are not going to be able to afford to maintain the capacity that they have in those lines today. So coal was 41% of rail tonnage and 21.6% of revenue in 2012. Just cut those numbers in half by the end of the decade. But everybody says, don't worry about that because we're going to do so much intermodal. Well, truckers earned $200 billion last year. The railroads only earned $65 billion for about the same ton miles, the same productivity. They got 3 times the revenue. And so where are the new shipments going? Well, short hauls do not favor railroads. Smaller quantities, truckload, less than a truckload do not favor railroads. Just in time, not located on rail, not in intermodal lanes. These are all problems for railroads. We lose big time. But then on top of that is the driverless truck. Now, a lot of people say, oh, there's never going to be a driverless truck. That may even be true, but what there will be is a driven truck that is followed by 4, 5, 6, 10 trucks that do not have drivers, followed only a couple of feet apart, so that you'll effectively have 10 trucks driven by 1 man. And when you get to that point, I had a consultant tell me that 60% of rail intermodal could go away. So if we were counting on intermodal to replace coal, we have a problem. Of course, right now, with fuel low, intermodal traffic is down because the trucking industry is reducing its prices far faster than the rail industry. And the rail industry already only gets $500 a box for some moves from Chicago to Los Angeles, so how much money is being made on that? So I end by saying that I think there's an opportunity for passenger trains, but we are going to have to engage the railroads, and there's going to have to be public investment in the railroads to make it all happen. Be happy to take any questions.
Do you think we'll ever see high-speed trains from style over on the East Coast and possibly the West Coast?
High-speed trains from the East Coast to the West Coast.
No, other than the ones on the East Coast.
Other than the ones on the East Coast and West
LA or
Coast.
San Francisco.
Wherever in the world high-speed trains have been developed, they've been layered onto a robust network of regular speed trains, 80-mile-an-hour trains. So if you think about France, which was the home of the TGV, which I think is a great system, you had trains running from Paris to Lyon. It just took longer than the high-speed train. But people were really used to riding high trains, and they adapted to high-speed trains. The other thing that was an advantage was that the Paris to Lyon regular service served all the little towns between Paris and Lyon. What we're trying to do in Texas, and I hope the Texas Central guys are successful, what we're trying to do in Texas is really put an airplane system on the ground. It's not a train. It's a train only because it uses rail. But what it really does is it serves Dallas and Houston. It doesn't serve the 175 towns in between, and they're all mad. The ranchers are mad. Everybody's mad because they look at the railroad as stealing property and giving them no benefit back except a lot of noise. I think that's the biggest problem high-speed rail has, is that it doesn't do what it needs to do to get the political support across a broader spectrum. And that's going to slow down the development of high-speed rail. It's one of the reasons that I'm in favor of developing more 80-mile-an-hour trains between, and I'm using Chicago, Indianapolis, but it could be, you know, Denver to Pueblo, or it could be Denver to Cheyenne. It could be right here in Colorado. But we need to teach people to ride a train. The reason we're successful in Illinois, well, it's partly because all the Republican governors gave their money back, so we got their money. But the reason we're successful in Illinois is because people were riding commuter trains to Chicago all along. And when somebody said, hey, we're going to be able to get you to St. Louis in 4 hours, we got political support for that because they understood that it was going to add to the picture. It wasn't just going to be some new thing that got dropped in.
Yeah, and one of the big issues that we hear about, we don't run into it, we don't run railroads, but is particularly in the passenger service on the Class 1 freight lines, is liability insurance and how.
I think liability insurance is solved. And the reason for that, sadly, was the tragic accident that Amtrak had last year in the Northeast Corridor. There's a $200 million federal limit on liability, and we have $200 million in insurance. And when Amtrak had that accident, of course, all the lawyers tried to break that $200 million to get more money for their clients. They couldn't break it. The only thing they could do is go to Congress and get Congress to change the law. And they wanted Congress to make the number $1 billion. Congress didn't do that. Congress said, well, you know, we said $200 million back in the 90s. So what's inflation been since then? So they changed it to $295 million because that's what inflation is. And we now have $295 million. So I really think the Class 1 railroads that I've talked to about doing private passenger trains, we've addressed that specific issue.
So they'd accept that from you, not just Amtrak.
Not just Amtrak. Well, and they're accepting it from other commuter agencies. Now, it is individual railroads. I mean, if BNSF says, no, we don't want $295 million, you got to give us $1 billion, because there's no compelled access, they have the right to do that. But if it's a railroad that would really rather get Amtrak off of their line and deal with me or Richard Branson or Tim O'Toole, don't make a deal
So
with
that's
us.
the leverage.
Yeah, and you know, if it was billion's available too. It's just an additional cost to get up to that higher number. I just don't think that insurance and liability is going to be an issue.
Could you comment on the efforts of Florida East Coast Railroad and their?
Florida East Coast Railroad, all aboard Florida, Bright Line, going to start, I think, next year between West Palm Beach and Miami. They have a mission, and their mission is probably about not just running passenger trains, but it's about developing some phenomenal real estate that Florida East Coast owns. And I think the West Palm Beach to Miami train is going to run well. It's going to be a lot more expensive than the commuter train that makes the same run, but I think people will ride it because it'll be a lot faster and it'll be new and different and fun. And it'll have Wi-Fi. And it'll have adult beverages. So I really do think that making the train better than the alternative is part of the problem. This is why I think John Micah and this whole thing about food service on Amtrak is totally misguided. Amtrak needs to be making service better so that people will pay more rather than making service worse and accepting the idea that people will pay less. We actually serve a Micah burger on our train. It's cooked with hot air. It's 100% rump. It's worth about a nickel.
80 years ago, trains were cruising at 100. Shouldn't that be the normal speed instead of a high speed?
That's a really good question.
My favorite sign on the Milwaukee Road was slow to 90.
Yeah. Well, I'm an IC guy, and I'm from Paducah, and there was a guy I worked with who started in the steam era, and in Paducah we did a lot of 10-mile-an-hour stuff. He borrowed out up at Champaign. The first train he got was train number one in the city of New Orleans. He'd never even been on a diesel locomotive before. He's sitting there reading the timetable, and the old engineer says, "You ever run one of these, Sonny?" And he goes, "I can run her, Dad." And he gets over there, and the speedometer needle's up around 116, 117 miles an hour, and he goes, "Holy crap!" And he reaches up to notch her back, and the engineer goes, son, 2 minutes behind schedule now. I think 80 miles an hour is a speed that the freight railroads can deal with and run their freight trains. When you get to, unless you're going to build brand new railroad at a huge cost, if you want to run on the freight railroads, you've got to do it in a way that they can deal with it. Rob Krebs said to me that the problem with a lot of the passenger trains they run for Amtrak is it's like trying to get a Ferrari around a string of dump trucks on a one-lane road. And I think that's an apt description. At 80 miles an hour, your overtakes of 70-mile-an-hour freight trains take a while. At 100 miles an hour, all the freight trains have to pull over to let you by. So I think 80 miles an hour is a darn good speed, and I'm not out there trying to run anything faster than 80 miles an hour, even if there's double track, because even a double track, if there's a train going the same way as you, now you got to cross over to that other track to go around it, and all the trains coming in the other direction have to wait until you get around. So I really think you have to be conscious of the freight network. In England, we run freight trains. Our freight trains in England run 75 miles an hour because otherwise we'd never get out there. And so a 40 mile an hour, 50 mile an hour, 60 mile an hour freight train. Now, the only solution to that is put the New York Central back with 4 tracks so that you have 2 tracks that are purely dedicated to passenger. Billions of dollars, the country's not ready for that yet.
So I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the highway issues you brought up, the truck traffic. Obviously we put a lot of money into our highways. Our highways are now really underbuilt, and so we're competing for dollars. I think a lot of us have an understanding that trains can be more effective for our dollars. So how do you work with that? Northern Colorado, we are bending over backwards to get an additional lane added in either direction. Yet our EIS says by 2035 we need 2 more lanes in each direction. And it's clearly less money if we also start to add passenger rail, which is also in the EIS. This is what our population needs will be. So how do you have those conversations and create that political will where you're not competing against the highways so much as you're making it clear that moving commodities on the highways also allows for other use of the rail and not be in that competitive mode?
So the first question I would throw out is, so you notice that the gas tax hasn't gone up for about 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
So when you think about how the highways are paid for, the gas tax really only supports the federal aid highway system. So it supports the interstate highways and some of the U.S. highways. So if you live in, downtown Colorado Springs and the trucks get off the highway and they go down the city street, who pays for that? The people who own property in Colorado Springs. So if you're not a highway user, let's just say, and I'm really not. I live in LaGrange, Illinois. I walk to the commuter train. I take the train downtown. I probably drive 2,000 miles a year. And yet all those trucks pounding down the Range Road, I'm paying for part of that. And when the snowplow comes to clear the road, it's clearing it for the trucks. Are the trucks paying for that? No. When there's an accident and the police come out, are the trucks paying for that? No. There's a lot of it that they're not paying anything for. And the problem is, we don't care. We have, as a society, we just decided that, you know what, that's part of the landscape. We subsidize truck and car driver, we subsidize their insurance, we subsidize accidents. I'm a true believer in rail transportation. We kill 40,000 people a year on the highways. I think it was Joseph Stalin who said, the death of one person is a tragedy, the death of 40,000 is a statistic. And so we just don't care. It's just part of the deal is that we're gonna kill 40,000 people a year come hell or high water. And I think at the end of the day, the only way this changes, because it is, the freight network is privately operated, is if somebody figures out how for railroads to make money on 250-mile hauls. Because that's where the future is going. More and more hauls will be shorter and shorter. Farm to table, we're going to do more regional programs, regional manufacturing centers. The railroads are very good at long hauls, coast to coast. They are not good at 250 mile. I have a 250 mile haul. We haul barley from the San Luis Valley, that fine Moravian barley that goes to Golden, Colorado. And I think we haul probably about 35% of the barley that Coors burns. So a few years ago, when Colorado raised the truck weights, what happened? Well, other than more accidents on 285 with barley trucks going to Golden, Union Pacific, BNSF, and San Luis and Rio Grande, all three of us had to reduce our rates in order to keep that move on rail. We lost it for a while. It was all going over the road. We had to reduce our rates to keep the move on rail. So we got less money to maintain our infrastructure only because the state of Colorado raised the truck weights. So there is no political consensus in favor of converting stuff to rail. It goes the other way.
Yeah, let's just take a couple more.
Okay, a couple more. Here's one.
Okay, all right. In my hometown of New Haven, they're doing a commuter rail between my hometown and Springfield, Massachusetts, through Hartford. And apparently, I'm just reading up on their website, they're welcoming other operators to bid for the work to do the rail transit. Do you have any news on any of that, or?
You know, we looked at that New Haven to Springfield. We looked at that, and the track there is actually owned by Amtrak, and the rules and the bids had obviously been written by Amtrak because there were 65 pages of terms and conditions. So we decided not to bid on that.
Oh, I see. Good one.
How's the rail link from Chicago to Des Moines coming? I understand that Iowa didn't have the money to go forward with it. Illinois did.
Yeah, but we only had pretend money in Illinois. You know, Illinois, the state of Illinois, about 10 years ago, and you know, we're an equal opportunity state. Both Democratic and Republican governors go to jail. I don't remember whether it was a Democratic or a Republican jailbird that did this, but they decided to take a pension holiday so that they could build more roads. So they took the money that they would have put into public pensions and put it into building more roads. And that went so well that the next governor did the same thing. So we went like 6 or 7 years without making the required contribution to the pension plan. And then all of a sudden we woke up one morning and said, those bad teachers, they want their pensions. What are we going to do? So the pension thing is now upside down enough that it's bankrupting the state. So right now, there are a number of passenger rail projects in Illinois that are on hold. The Quad Cities Des Moines project is on hold. The Rockford, Freeport, Dubuque project is on hold. And interestingly, I think Jack Tone is going to talk about St. Louis. St. Louis is continuing to progress, and there's a lot more that needs to be done there. But we're taking a break there because we don't have money to invest in Illinois right now. You know, I really appreciate everybody. I will be here for a little bit after it's over. If you got another question, feel free to see me after the program. Thank you for your time and attention, and thank you for being enthusiastic about Pastor.